Buongiorno, sono Emilio, questo è Paolo e oggi facciamo risotto porcini e anche brutti e buoni.
Welcome to our kitchen, guys. Today Emilio and I are going to be showing the secrets to creating the most incredible porcini risotto and these wonderful hazelnut macaroons, brutti e buoni, ugly but delicious.
Our whole object here is to bring people closer to food in the more human kind of way and a more family style way.
And that's exactly what we're planning to do with you guys today. We've got two simple recipes. All of great Italian food is classically simple. We're going to be doing a delicious porcini risotto with some fresh porcini, pan fried, and then we're also going to be doing some brutti e buoni.
Brutti e buoni is really, really cool because brutti e buoni literally means ugly but delicious. You know, much like me, no? Brutti e buoni is a proper old school Italian dish. It's basically, what is exactly? Tell us what it is.
So they are these delicious, either hazelnut or almond. We're going to be making the classic, which are hazelnut. They are hazelnut macaroons. They're these little cookies. They're called brutti because when you make them up, they're actually all a little knobbly and they're not the best looking things. But they are buoni because they are really delicious. Why I love it is it's kind of reflects classic Italian cooking. There are 3 ingredients that go into these, and yet the finished cookie is just so incredible. Should I get going with those?
I think you're going to start going on that, and then we're going to chat about the porcini risotto.
If you are making brutti e buoni, you're going to need either hazelnuts or almonds. I'm using hazelnuts. I have toasted these off, and then I've allowed them to cool off. It's important that you allow them to cool off because they're going to be going into the food processor, and we don't want to release those oils. Then I've got a bit of icing sugar here, and then I've got 2 eggs. The vanilla extract is a little optional extra, but we like it because it just kind of gives everything a nice sort of pop, a nice bit of extra flavor. I'm going to be starting off by getting the hazelnuts and the icing sugar into the food processor. And while I do that, I'm just going to get Milo to help me out by separating these eggs for me. Because it's a sort of macaroon, we only need the egg whites.
Now you must also remember that not everyone maybe has access to a lovely KitchenAid food processor at home, so the nuts would actually be either chopped by hand or done in a mortar and pestle in a traditional kind of way. We of course are going to be fast forwarding this a little bit just to make it nice and easy.
Sorry. Alright, so as I said, toasted hazelnuts that have been allowed to cool off, and then some icing sugar, just because that's going to help it to just mix into the egg white really easily.
Be very careful when you are separating your eggs. You only need the egg white, and the egg yolk should never break into your egg white. Otherwise, you do have to start again. And of course, naturally, because I say that, chances are I'm going to end up breaking an egg yolk into you, aren't I? But let's see what happens. Beautiful. There we go. Our first one. Second egg over there. Beautiful. I'm actually going to just cheat and pour that right into my hand like that.
And your
Lovely
eggs should be
hack.
at room temperature. Whenever you're going to be whisking them up and getting them nice and light, you kind of want them to be at room temp. I'm just going to grind this up. Now you've got 2 choices. You can run this for 30 or 40 seconds until it's nice and fine, and that's going to give you a less knobbly and less brutti looking cookie, or you can leave it with a little bit of texture. I like it halfway between the two, so I'm going to run it so that some of it turns quite fine and other pieces I'm going to leave quite textured. So this recipe is actually 200 years old. It really does form part of classic Italian cooking. It's from the sort of 1750s thereabout. And it was a perfect opportunity for what you do with the egg whites after you've used the yolks to make biscotti, or you've used it to make some ice cream.
Zabaglione, things like that.
Those egg whites are generally left behind, and this is one of those places where you would use them.
I'm going to start whisking up those egg whites.
Just till soft peaks. Are we going with a more textured one, or are we going with a finer one?
I'm going to go midway. I like the idea of the midway one. All right.
And the oven, I've also got the oven on, and it's a nice, it's 180 degrees, pretty standard temperature, just so that we can get them in there. soft peaks.
I always describe these, if anyone does know about amaretti cookies, this is almost a hazelnut version of an amaretti cookie. So they are absolutely Moorish. They go well with a little cup of coffee or an espresso after your meal. You have a little Brutti e Buoni just to finish up a classic Italian dish. When you are whisking your egg whites, you always want to work quite gently so you don't make too big a bubbles. If your bubbles are too big, your meringue is not stable enough. So you do a gentle whisk to get to nice soft peak stage.
And if you know about Italy, these are from Lombardia or from Lombardy, one of Italy's northern provinces.
Also, the concept of all of this Italian food, and when we get to the risotto, we're going to elaborate further on that. It all comes from the concept of la cucina povera. And la cucina povera just means the poor man's kitchen, because everything had to be simple and accessible, and they created a world of flavors from using very simple ingredients. Semplice.
You could, of course, use a machine.
Do you want to use the vanilla?
To be quiet, we decided to do it by hand. You can chuck in a teaspoon for us.
Vanilla extract, good quality always. When you do, try and avoid a vanilla essence and rather go for an extract because it is pure, which is what we want. There we go, beautiful.
Just kind of whisk that in. And that is optional, so you wouldn't have to add that. If you wanted to, you could just keep it to the classic 3, egg whites, sugar, and the hazelnuts. Good one. Yes, great idea. All right, we're going to get these in here. And as much as we're stirring this into egg whites, we're not going to be folding it. There's too much of the dry ingredients for us to maintain this nice sort of fold through. But at the same time, we don't want to overwork it. So we're just going to kind of start stirring this together.
The whisking of the egg whites is less about creating a meringue and more about adding volume to your egg whites, that you can hydrate your hazelnuts and your sugar nicely, which is working beautifully now. It almost looks like fudgy hazelnuts and sugar.
I'm not sure if you can see that. You can see it's kind of pretty straightforward.
Brutti.
Brutti.
And of course, the nice thing about this in a modern world is that, of course, they are gluten-free. So if you do have any friends that do have any gluten issues, it's a really great one to prepare, and no one's going to feel sad that they don't have any flour inside them. They are naturally gluten-free items.
However, don't wait for a gluten-intolerant friend to find a reason to make these. They're delicious.
They're delicious at any moment.
To make them. And then I've just got a 1.5 tablespoon scoop here. You could use a tablespoon if you wanted smaller ones. You could go bigger. You just have to adjust your baking time. Kind of pop it up against the side. Give them a little bit of space. They are going to expand a bit. Using this tablespoon scoop, I think, smooths out the edges and it makes them a little less brutti.
But just as buoni. They should be almost crispy on the outside from the egg white meringue and then almost like a soft fudgy center. So think of it as a pavlova or a macaroon, really.
Well, that was going to be my next question. At about 14 minutes, you get a more sort of chewy and they're a little bit more gooey on the center. And about 17 minutes, they're a bit crunchier and golden. Which do you prefer? What are we doing today?
I think we go a little bit more golden. It's the kind of dish that you'd have your nonna sitting in a giant glass cloche on the table that anyone could help themselves because she's been making them all week, you know?
Your nonna was fancy. I would grab her crocheted piece of fabric, pull it off the top and threaten you with it. And then I've got, as I said, the oven set at 180. I'm going to set a timer because inevitably I will be distracted and you really want to get these out the minute they're ready. They're going to go slightly golden on the outside and they're going to have that lovely crunch, as Mila said. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Something so delicious about roasted hazelnuts. So good. All right, so I've got the cookies here. They're going to go into a 200 oven. I'm going to set a timer for 14 minutes so that they're nice and crunchy when they come out.
It tastes like Nutella already.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually dip them in chocolate and they actually taste of Nutella, which is quite incredible. We've got 2 little components for our risotto we're going to be making here. One of them is the fact that I have found some fresh porcini mushrooms. You cannot do Italy without having porcini mushrooms, guys. They are absolutely beautiful. They're visually appealing and they add the most incredible depth and umami flavor profile to your food. We're going to be doing some fabulous pan-fried porcini mushrooms, which we're going to be adding into our porcini risotto, where we've used dry porcini in our stock, and that's going to just add more depth and more layers of flavor to our risotto.
So as a rule, it doesn't matter what risotto you're making, you're always looking for sort of 2 parts, 2 flavors. For us, we're going to build the risotto around these dry porcini mushrooms that have been soaked in some water, and then we're going to finish it off with these beautiful pan-fried, almost porcini steaks. If you're doing a butternut risotto, you want to get some of that butternut in nice and early so it imparts color and flavor. But you finish off with most of your butternut at the end, so when you're eating it, your rice is soft and creamy, and you've got all that lovely sort of butternut flavor.
All right, so for the pan-fried porcini mushrooms, if I can ask you to help with either the garlic chili, I'll start doing the thyme. We're doing some garlic chili and thyme. Keep it nice and simple to allow the porcini mushrooms to stand out. I'm going to start doing the thyme, and with the thyme I always love just to combine my columns nicely like this so I can be nice and lazy and just start to strip all of those beautiful leaves off. You can do this with butter or olive oil or both. I'm wondering if today we might skip the butter so that everyone can enjoy some risotto a little bit later.
So we are skipping the butter because we're lovely people and we like to make everybody happy. It is almost more traditional in northern Italian cooking that you would have had butter.
And not olive oil.
And not olive oil. However, we're in Joburg, so we're going to just get the garlic in there. How do you want your garlic? Just finely chopped?
I think just finely chopped is perfect.
One or two?
One I think will be good for this.
Basta.
Yeah. I'm going to actually add my thyme straight into my pan already without even switching it on. And the porcini are quite beautiful. You separate them by just pulling the stem off like this. You use your knife and you start to just slice off the outside here. And they're really, really gorgeous. They almost get a pearlescent style of coloring. So they don't look like they're from this planet really. They shine once you cut them open.
And yes, the porcini are delicious. If you only have access to porcibellini, to a brown mushroom, don't not do this. Still do it. It's still delicious. It's just not a porcini.
Correct. And the nice thing is about the dry porcini, of course, you can get dry porcini any time of year. So you can generally find them at any good green grocer. You can find your dry porcini. Fresh porcini, a little bit more seasonal. They are grown locally, which is quite incredible. Famous for growing under oak trees. So really, really beautiful flavor profile. Yeah, you need to peel your porcini though, because they do get quite woody on the outside.
Is that your way of telling me not to heat up the pan?
Oh no, you can absolutely heat up the pan.
And then while you are preparing the porcini, we're also going to just heat up our stock. To make any risotto, you need hot stock. The stock we're using here is a vegetable stock that we've enriched with a whole lot of the dry porcini mushrooms. You really want to drive that delicious umami flavor. It's also important when you're making risotto, you need to taste your stock, because that's actually where all the seasoning of the risotto is carried. If the stock is not salty enough, your risotto will not have enough flavor to it. And you want to make sure that it's got enough body to it.
Right.
Yes, I have tasted this one already.
Yes, it's delicious, isn't it? I do love the flavor of porcini.
I feel bad like I've left you to do all the work.
Not at all. You can start slicing those caps for me. Thank you. There is a great story. I don't know if you're going to kill me or not for saying this and starting it or not. There's a great story, if you are into storytelling, on how to remember how to make a risotto. Are you going to tell us the love story, Paul?
No, you can go for it.
So there is a story that says that risotto is never just a dish of rice, that risotto is a story of life and love and everything in between. And it basically follows the concept of a relationship when you make a risotto. It takes time, it takes patience, but the outcome at the end is obviously going to be worth it. And in the story of life and love, the stock is the most important, because the stock represents who you are as a person, that you need to be complete, you need to be full-bodied before you get into a relationship. And ideally, of course, you should be smoking hot before you get into a relationship.
Are we ready for?
I think we can add our porcini into here.
So obviously, whenever you're working with garlic, you don't want your garlic to burn or to anything, but you do need to make sure that you've given it a chance that it actually can cook a little bit. It will get a chance to cook further once we get the mushrooms in there.
You can't do Italian without good old garlic, guys.
Siamo pronto.
Siamo pronto. Beautiful. I'll just do the cap. The cap of the porcini. And then there's that beautiful color again, almost luminescent, that comes through when you remove that. It's got a beautiful green-yellow shine.
And then in preparation for the actual risotto, I'm just going to drain off the porcini mushrooms that we've soaked. I am being careful how I take them out, that I don't lift up anything from the bottom of the soaking liquid. There is always a chance that porcini mushrooms have a bit of sand on them. When you soak the mushrooms, the sand falls to the bottom, so you want to make sure that you leave that sand there. This amazing umami-filled liquid we are still going to use, but when I pour it in, I'm going to leave a centimetre's worth of that liquid so that if it has the sand, it stays at the bottom.
Just to note that this is just water that was soaking with the porcini, and the color that the porcini gives is so intense, it turns the water brown. So that is just water that has been soaking. I'm going to add a little bit of seasoning. I do believe in seasoning in layers, so I season as I go. A couple cracks of salt. I'm going to do some brandy in here today.
I'll grab the brandy for you. In fact, let's do brandy.
Let's do brandy so we can give us a nice flambe in the kitchen as well today, which is always nice. I like to do brandy with my mushrooms as well. A good cognac, a good brandy.
So if you are working with portobellini mushrooms, you kind of want to give them a really long, slow cook so that you can push all the liquid out, allow the flavor to intensify. When it comes to porcini mushrooms, you want to work the opposite way around. You want it to be almost like a steak. You want it to be really hot. You want it to pick up its color, and you want it to, get its flavor quick, so we don't lose too much of those amazing liquids.
So,
and you can, I don't know if you can see, but it picks up this beautiful golden color as it's cooking, and you don't want it to go too fast. You want it to be nice and quick.
So another 2 minutes on this, and we should be good to go.
That's perfect.
All I need then is a lovely little lighter. The light is already here, so we can burn things.
There.
So in classic Italian cooking, there are some foundations. And I think this is one of the most important foundations when it comes to Italian cooking. Whether it's a ragu, whether it's ossobuco, risotto, a minestrone, onion, carrot, and celery. The French also use this. In Italy, it's called the
soffritto.
The soffritto, the fry-up. All right. And if we go back to that beautiful love story, if the stock represents who you are, and the risotto is the relationship, every relationship should start with a good, solid foundation. And the soffritto is that foundation to a good relationship.
Now, without romanticizing it, but with making it practical, soffritto is always made up of a mixture of onion, carrot, and celery. Whatever your weight of onion is made up 50% carrot and 50% celery. As Milo said, the French do have a similar thing, mirepoix. Every country has a flavor base, and that is their cuisine is built around that. And for the Italian one, you always need to have these three ingredients in there. I love the Italian name, soffritto, because fritto explains what we need to do to it. We need to fry it nice and gently to release all of those lovely flavors. I can see you.
I'm itching to burn things, so let's burn things. Guys, if you ever want to do a flambe, please just be mindful of doing it at home. Don't do it with a dirty extractor above you. You will start a grease fire in your kitchen. We are going to make this a nice big brandy fire. So a splash of fire and a little fire like that. Love a bit of theatricals.
But more than theatrics, there's also an amazing
that flavor
that's going to come from that.
Something unbelievable. The flavor of brandy and mushrooms.
So then once these mushrooms are cooked off, are you happy with those?
I think I'm happy with them. I'm actually going to remove them right now, not take them any further. And we've got our beautiful porcini mushrooms with a lovely golden color on them. And that smell has just filled the room in such an incredible way. Oh, I love them. Fantastic. I'm going to just clear this aside.
And then for the actual risotto itself, as I say, traditionally you would have gone with a bit of butter, or what we like to do at the cookery, we use a mixture of butter and olive oil. We've just gone with olive oil today, just so that we can keep the recipe nice and vegan. And then we're going to be getting into that base of our oil. We're going to be getting our onion, our carrots, and our celery. I generally get it into a pan that's not too hot, and the reason being,
relationships have to start slowly.
Yeah, but also, this is one of those things where the Italians are, I was using this on the brown mushrooms. Risotto is northern Italian. Those Italians will tell you that they are the most stylish Italians, that they are the most graceful Italians. And when we treat our soffritto, we need to treat it that way. We want no color in the soffritto. We want to soften it off. We want to release all those beautiful flavors, but we do not want to brown it. You never want to have your risotto, sorry, you just...
No, I'm just saying to talk so you can hear.
You never want to have the risotto sort of fighting and having that color, because you've browned everything too much. And then I've probably got, it's just a pinch, I ground way too much. A pinch of salt, which is going to go into the onions. That salt is going to pull water out of the onions, which is going to prevent it from browning. And then going into that, you want to talk about your flavor base, Emilio?
No, not at all. I was just...
So going into that, we've got our dried up porcini mushrooms. So here's a catch with risotto. One of the biggest complaints people always have is about the texture of risotto. They say that it's texturally, if they're not sure about it, it's too soft and mushy, it's this, it's that. Firstly, we're going to cook our rice until it is al dente so that we do not have porridge of rice. Secondly, we have prepared our porcini mushrooms to serve on top of our risotto at the end so that we have the true texture of mushrooms. And then these mushrooms here, which are the ones we soaked, I'm actually going to get them in right at the beginning now so that they can impart all of their flavor into the dish, but so that by the time you get to the end, you won't actually know that they were in there, and that texture you won't feel convicted by that sort of, there's nothing like a mushy, dehydrated, rehydrated mushroom. It's not a great texture. So by putting it in early, we're going to make sure we kind of get rid of it.
So we can see our relationship has truly kicked off now, and as a relationship should kick off, it's kicked off hot and sizzling. And this is something very important to remember when you have a relationship or with the risotto, is that stagnancy will kill it. So always make sure to keep things on the go from beginning to end.
That I keep stirring.
You keep stirring the pot. You always have to keep that stuff moving. Always keep things on the go. You want to let this go for what? I'd say about 5 to 6 minutes.
Well, until it's softened up nicely,
softened up.
yeah.
You want your onions translucent, you want your carrots nice and soft, you want to have chunky bits when you cook your risotto.
But at the same time, keep it moving so that you don't pick up any sort of colour. Then, probably most important, more important than anything, we need to talk rice. I want to say you can use any rice. You can't use any rice. You want to use a rice that is specific to risotto. We are using arborio rice. It's got a short, fat grain of rice that's loaded with starch. That starch is what's going to make our risotto deliciously creamy. There are over 200 different types of rice that the Italians grow for risotto, but the ones that you're going to find most commonly around South Africa are going to be arborio, which is the most, and then vialone. But we always suggest arborio, especially if you haven't made a risotto before. It's the most forgiving rice.
There's also ones like canaroli, there's ones like Roma, and they're actually quite similar to the Spanish rice that they use for paella, bomba rice. Short grain, high starch. Are those your Brutti e Buoni?
Brutti e Buoni sono pronto.
I'm going to keep this moving. Oh, those look unbelievable. Delicious.
So you kind of understand where the name Brutti, because they're not the prettiest looking cookie, but if you could smell them, you would fully understand where the buoni comes from, where the delicious comes from, because the kitchen is just filled with this lovely smell of roasted hazelnuts.
If you're a fan of Nutella, which I don't know if there's anyone who isn't in this planet, but if you like the flavor of Nutella, you're going to love these. They're absolutely to die for.
And remember, you can do them with almonds as well. We just did them with hazelnut.
They're about a minute away over here.
Yeah. How's that looking?
All right, the sofrito looks ready for the next step, I'd say. So the relationship has been going well, guys. But in every relationship, there's going to be a fight. And that fight...
You haven't even added the rice in yet.
...is the rice. It's heavy, it's weighted, it's going to kill the heat in the relationship. But fights must happen. We do this for our risotto.
Sorry, while you're telling your story there, they've had 2 or 3 minutes so that they can cool off a bit. And now I'm just going to remove these so that they have a chance to cool off completely.
Our arborio rice goes in, and I leave 2 grains behind because of superstition and good luck. You never add everything into the pot. So you always leave 2 grains behind for good luck. And the arborio rice gets added dry into your pot. You do not add any liquid to it yet. And what you do here is you allow the rice to start to expand. We stir it non-stop, and the rice will start to heat up. I always call this the fight in the relationship because you'll start to hear it eventually. And you'll hear the rice hissing and spitting is what you want to hear before you move on to your next step. So for now, we just keep this moving and we allow things to get really, really intense in this pot. We do not want to brown the rice. If you brown the rice, what happens, Paolo?
We're going to seal it. So what we're actually doing is as we heat up the rice, you are opening these little sort of pores in the rice, which allows the rice to absorb the liquid and to release its starch. It's this beautiful thing where you have to sort of continuously stir the rice, coaxing the starch out of it. So there is, like, as Milo says, there is a story to be told behind risotto.
Right, as the rice gets hotter, I can start to audibly hear the popping noises of the rice as it heats up.
I like to say that when it first goes in, the rice will sizzle because your pan is hot, and after a couple of minutes, you're going to hear the rice will start to crackle. When your rice starts to crackle, dove il vino?
We move on to our next step, which is a glass of wine. And the wine should always diffuse the fight. So there should always be a sigh of relief. The pot should sigh like it's happy to receive the wine. Now, after a long day and you have a glass of wine, all you do is just, and the pot should sigh like that. Do you want to make the pot sigh?
No, you can go for it. I'm tidying up.
So we have this
to
prevent the fight. We add our lovely wine and we have that lovely, that sigh of relief. The wine will immediately calm the fight down and the pot gets silent. There's no more noise now, a gentle bubbling sound and no other noise. We allow the wine to completely cook out. So we really want to let that dry up a bit because we don't want the taste of the wine in terms of its alcohol content.
Yeah, you want it to be reduced. The Italians will tell you that this gives the rice its sweet heart because technically the first liquid to go in is the liquid that's going to end up in the center of the grain of rice. So you kind of want to get that, all of that stock absorbed, and then once that's been absorbed, we're then going to start. And this is where the true labor of love begins. For the next 15 or so minutes, we will add the stock to the rice, never the rice to the stock, and we will stir it as we go. Now there's a technical reason why you do this. Risotto rice, the arborio rice that we're using, has a very high starch content. The only way to get that starch out is by coaxing the rice, by agitating the rice and rubbing the rice. So if you took that rice and you threw it into the bowl of stock and you tried to stir it, the rice would just simply float around the pot. What we want to do instead is slowly introduce a couple of ladlefuls into the rice in the pot and stir it all the time so that the rice has a chance to rub and to release that starch.
I always say the way that Paul taught me as well with this, and it's a good way to remember it, is that you and your lover should always grow in the same way. So your rice and your stock should remain flush with each other for the whole duration of the risotto, and you do not stop stirring. It is the true labor of love.
The only way to get that starch out is by stirring continuously. And every rice has a different outcome. If we were making an Indian meal in our basmati, we would have soaked it, we would have removed the starch from the rice so that our rice is lovely and loose when we're done with it. With risotto rice, we want that creaminess, we want that starchiness.
The smell is so good. Essence of umami, it's the most beautiful flavor profile. There are so many varietals of risotto that exist in Italy. Depends on not even, I would say, by region or by province, but by home. Every home will have its own unique take on the risotto. There are your classics, like funghi, like tartufo, your truffle, Milanese with saffron. But essentially it does become a pantry dish. So Nonna would open the fridge and open the pantry and see what was available. And you'd make a risotto out of that. Again, coming from that lovely cucina povera, the poor man's kitchen. Simple food, peasant food, and usually just with butter, onions, rice, and Parmesan cheese. There you go.
And then there's two chefs, you should never watch each other making a risotto because the urge is always there to go, some more stock.
There you go, off you go.
No. I wasn't saying, you're in charge of the risotto. I just like to give it stock.
You just like to give it stock.
Correct. And this process is going to go on for the next sort of 15 minutes. You'll know, everyone always says, how do you know when you need to have more stock in there? The important thing is just remember that idea that in order to get the starch out, you need to coax it out by rubbing the rice. If you've added so much stock that when you try to stir it, the rice is just floating, you need to lay back on the stock, don't add any more stock to the rice. Allow it to absorb it, but continue stirring all the way through. You can't actually see it, but our stock in the ladle is completely clear, and our stock in the pot is this cloudy, sort of creamy looking, and that's because we are slowly encouraging all of the starch out of the risotto. And risotto is obviously northern Italian, Piemontese, and the Italians have been making risotto for 400 odd years, since the sort of 1400s, I think. And risotto, rice actually entered Italy through Sicily. It came up through the Arab traders brought rice up, and it became a big part of Italian cuisine.
Quite fascinating, I found out as well. It's really beautiful because it arrived in the south in the more impoverished side of Italy, and it made its way gradually up to the north. And when it got to the north, they realized that the beautiful river delta in the north of Italy was perfectly suitable for growing the rice. So all the actual agriculture of the rice farming moved to the north of Italy, where a lot of money was made on the rice farming, where the northern Italians have a lot of their finance because of the control of agriculture in the north.
The Po River Valley.
The Po River Valley, correct. Southern Italians were forced, of course, to go work up in the north for the northerners, hence the old feud of the northerners and southerners in Italy, not quite enjoying each other too much.
Go for it.
Fab. I'm going to clear this up quickly.
Thank you. I didn't mean to take over your risotto stirring here.
So the biggest thing with your stock, and you can see as Paul is doing it, you add yourself back into your relationship a little bit at a time. You never want to flood the other person. So you give a little bit of yourself, a little bit of yourself. And you always want to make far too much stock than you require for the risotto. And the reason being is that you never want to run out halfway and have to start your stock again. Otherwise you lose the integrity of the rice. And the best way to remember that in terms of a relationship is to never give yourself to someone entirely. You always want to leave a little bit of yourself left over at the end. So always make sure there is too much stock for your risotto.
Sorry. Keep stirring.
I'm going to keep stirring. Seasoning is very important, but seasoning in the risotto does not get adjusted until the last few minutes. If I taste this now, it will taste under-seasoned. People make the mistake of adding salt, but they forget that with every single ladle of stock, you're adding more and more seasoning to your risotto. If it's too seasoned, you need to dilute your stock, but the adjustment gets done in the stock and seldom done in the risotto. How's that flavor building up?
Delicious.
Delicious.
I was taught by this lovely Italian chef how to make risotto, and
Chef Valentina.
She explained that God gives you two hands because one hand belongs to the pot and that hand will stir and stir. The other hand belongs to the glass of wine and to disciplining the children, which I quite like. So, and no matter what, if you're making risotto, you can still have a drink and discipline the children.
That's a very...
But it is a way of saying that no matter what, when you're making risotto, you do not stop stirring. You just keep stirring all the way through.
It's definitely not something you want to do for your friends if everyone is going to be sitting outside while you're in the kitchen. But I do find it's an incredible dish to do on a cold winter's night in your kitchen with your friends. One glass of wine goes into a risotto, and the rest of the bottle you drink with your friends while you're standing around and stirring the risotto together.
Beautiful. All right, so for the last sort of 15 minutes or so, we've been adding ladleful by ladleful. Because we had all these whole mushrooms in here, as we're lifting our broth out, our stock, we've just been leaving everything else in the pan. You're going to know your rice is ready when you bite into it. You feel every single grain of rice, but it doesn't get stuck in your teeth. Now, when you're finished making a risotto,
beautiful, delicious.
When you're finished making a risotto, you'll notice that the spoon doesn't stand up, it falls over. We need to now leave the risotto for 5 minutes. This stage is referred to as mantecare. Do we have a lid for that?
Yes, I do.
And what you do, when I was told that this is the point at which you grab the whole family and you get everyone into the table. Because risotto is quite fussy. You've got to stand it for 5 minutes, but at the same time you don't want it to stand too much longer than that. What we are going to do, I'm going to add the porcini mushrooms that we've prepared into the risotto so that they have a chance to warm through before we actually serve them. And I'm just going to scatter those out on top. Again, I'm not stirring them in because we don't want the mushrooms to continue cooking. We just want everything to just warm through nicely. And then on goes the lid, and now we're going to give it about 5 minutes for the risotto to cool off a little bit. So what's actually happening is, at a technical point, boiling starch, if you've ever made custard with sort of corn flour, you'll know hot custard has very little structure. As it cools off, it thickens up. We're doing exactly the same thing for the risotto here. We're allowing it now to go from boiling point from 100 degrees, we're allowing it to drop down to about 95 degrees. When we come back, we will then give it a nice vigorous stir, and you'll see it will hold its shape and will have beautiful texture to it. Why don't we, while we're waiting for the mantecare, let's get our Brutti e Buoni onto a plate here.
Something important to note about the risotto, don't try and rush the stage, the mantecare stage. It's super important to allow that risotto to stand. If you don't, your risotto will always be exceptionally wet and soupy. You need to allow that proper stand time.
And equally, don't let it stand too long because you'll have the opposite effect.
It will get too dry. Lovely. Yeah, we're going to share one of those. Oh, that looks unbelievable.
Extra fudgy. You kind of get the idea why they call them Brutti. They're not the prettiest.
They're not pretty.
But they are good. They are so good.
They're almost too good. They're so delicious. And they've got this most incredible chew. And then that flavor almost feels like there's already chocolate inside of them, which is quite incredible. That flavor of hazelnut is almost intense like chocolate. It's sensational.
I'm going to leave you talking since I put the whole thing in my mouth.
The standing time, as we say, is super important. And it really does feel like we need to just rush this now. But we are going to have to wait a little bit. Fresh parsley to finish your risotto, especially with something like umami flavors like mushroom. It adds that lovely fresh lift that is required to break the single umami-ness of it. You want to add freshness and lightness to your dish.
It's very important to have that. So after the rice has had about 5 minutes for it to stand, we're then going to be ready to give it one last stir and to get it plated up. And it kind of a little judge to give you the idea is if you built enough structure in that starch, you can see when we pop the spoon in, the spoon stands upright. And that's because the starch has had a chance to go from that boiling point down a little bit, and now it's actually holding its form.
It's quite incredible. It's being held by about 2 centimeters of rice. It's holding the spoon
now,
fully upright.
Before serving, we're just going to give it a quick stir through.
Beautiful.
And you'll notice also when you do that stir through, instead of the rice sitting flat in the pot, the rice starts to hold its shape and hold its body. Why don't you plate some up for us?
Fabulous. Let's grab our first little scoop of risotto over there.
I'm going to ask you to be graceful in your plating,
I'm
not
trying.
nonna-like in your plating.
Don't slap it on. You see, I've already made a mess. Hurry, hurry is not a speed.
More a case of don't put so much in the plate.
Right,
Now
there's
let me do
number
that
one.
last one.
Thank you.
Without the food
I'm
on
going
the
to
side.
just do. So when Italians plate food, there is method to every kind of madness. And an Italian style of eating, if you've ever been to Italy, eating is not just for petrol. Eating is art. So even for the risotto, it gets mounded up beautifully on a plate, and then you use your fork to start to spread the outside layer on the cooler edge of the plate to start to cool it down while leaving the center nice and hot. So you spread it out, you scrape and you eat. You spread it out, you scrape and you eat, and you leave that
Now,
center
what are you
nice and
missing
hot.
for that perfect image?
Last
Some
thing over
parmesan
here,
on the
for this one over here, we're doing some lovely fresh Parmesan cheese, grana padano, and we're going to grate that over the top. You can also do lovely shavings if you prefer, but I do love this lovely flavor of the Parmesan cheese over the top. And maybe a little bit more parsley just to break that lovely
Sorry,
white.
I'm just grabbing us some forks.
Lovely, beautiful. And we've got our beautiful porcini risotto made.
Sorry, so I'm just get you a fork for that. We're going to lush out of this one.
Are we going to have a little taste of
You
that?
can have a taste of that.
I think you should taste it.
No, you can. I'm noticing how you sprinkle parsley everywhere.
And Parmesan everywhere. So you see, as I start to just spread that out nicely on the plate, and I just scrape that up like this.
Buono.
Really
Delicious.
fantastic, yeah. Would you like to try a little bit?
And it's really simple. It's rice, some onion, carrot, celery, and then
Go on.
some mushrooms in there as well. And
Semplice.
you've created this dish, which is just, it's just foodgasm.
A 5-star dish made with the simplest of ingredients, which is what Italian food is. Flavor is sensational.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Delicious.
So guys, just of course, one last time on what we've done today. We have just plated up a beautiful fresh porcini risotto, all right, classic Italian dish from the north of Italy. And for dessert today,
These amazing hazelnut Brutti e Buoni, ugly but so delicious cookies. Yeah, thank you so much. We hope that you guys are going to give this a try, and are you going to love it as much as we do?